Welcome to the Week in IndyCar and the Marshall Pruitt podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Our guest this week, our dear friend, the mayor of Hinchtown, James Hinchcliffe, had an awesome call with our boy just a little while ago. Doing his best, we have explored all manner of telecommunication options, regular cell phone, him in the driveway, him in the garage, all kinds of things to try and get the best connection possible while renovations are being done at his house. So we succeeded for the most part. Apologies for some of the dips in cellular / FaceTime audio coverage, but we did our best. Great questions this week. This might have been the best collection of overall questions we've had for any guest in 2018. So thanks again to everybody on Facebook and Twitter who really took care of us with some fun stuff. We also, of late, have been categorizing the questions, trying to put them into little buckets of themes, and there wasn't really one to find here, and I actually think that worked best with Hinch. He's known for being comedic genius, a lot of fun, also very serious, so we just weaved in and out of the serious, of the fun, and all thanks to you for that. We're doing another recording tomorrow, and we're actually getting our Christmas week / holiday week in IndyCar episode done early. Our friend Jay Frye, who was booked when he was just a lowly IndyCar competition president, and since that booking, he's now become the president of IndyCar. Jay is going to be calling in tomorrow morning. That would be Wednesday the 19th for that episode. So if you do have questions for the man in his newly appointed role, please send them in now on Facebook and Twitter. And all that aside, let's get into a couple of questions you have for me. But before we do that, the tradition that we have been doing all year long, thanks to our friends at Toronto Motorsports, we give away a Week in IndyCar t-shirt to whomever's question I like the most from the previous week. Well, that goes to Stitch Turner. Came in via Facebook, who asked last week's guest, IndyCar CEO Mark Miles. We're trying to close out with a lot of guests that you all have been asking for and enjoyed. Stitch Turner said, if Mr. Miles could take any car in the IMS Museum out for a spin, which one and why? And among all the technical things and procedural things and business things that Mark was asked, I just really enjoyed this one because we got to see a little bit of the human side of Mark, and he chose one of AJ Foyt's old roadsters. So good on him for that. Another quick mention that our friends at TorontoMotorsports.com, also partly in theme with our guest this week and Mr. Hinchcliffe, they do have lots of Hinch, Robert Wickens, in general 2018 IndyCar swag, t-shirts, models, stickers, etc., all on a pretty solid holiday discount. And if you are an American fan of IndyCar, you do know that the American dollar will definitely get you more Canadian dollars. So definitely a discount already there, but definitely look at some of the items that TorontoMotorsports.com has for you if you want to gather some things for yourself. That's always the best gift for Christmas. Not what those your friends and your loved ones give you. Those are occasionally disappointments. I'm a big fan of just going and buying the things that I want for myself to make sure I have an awesome Christmas. So check out our pals at TorontoMotorsports.com, and they should be able to hook you up there. Got a couple of questions for me before we dive into Hinch time. Got one here starting off with Kyle Brown. He says, MP, any thoughts on the Formula E race this past weekend? Bob Varsha estimated top speeds are up 35 miles an hour. And Kyle says, I felt this moved them from unwatchably slow to acceptable for when no other racing is available. I'm glad I gave the first race a chance. I'm in the same vein with you, Kyle. They're faster. The fact that they're able to use one chassis now, I think it's removed some of the gimmicky stuff. They're definitely quicker. Maybe more in the what we would call Pro Mazda. Now they're calling it the Indy Pro 2000 series. Kind of middle of the rung, road to Indy type speed. Who knows, maybe a tad bit faster in some situations, but I think the cars look better there. The speed helps for sure. I mean, the talent behind the steering wheel in most cases, some pretty heavy hitters. And it was very painful to watch folks where you're like, yeah, that guy should be in Formula One. And he's out there farting around on what looks like a riding lawnmower. Silent one at that. So, yeah, good to see that Formula E is continuing to progress. I don't know if it's ever going to be a thing that excites. truly excites. I don't mean folks who are into green racing and such, but just as a pure sporting fan, are folks going to flock to Formula E and just go, it was the best ever? Don't know. Very skeptical there, as I've been all along, but I'm glad to see that they do continue to move maybe in a stronger direction towards understanding that racing is a sport, not just a cause. Let's go to Ryan Ward. It says, Marshall, any rumors on the broadcast crew for NBC/NBCSN this season? You've been quite vocal about your views on Paul Tracy, and now that Townsend Bell is a full-timer on the IMSA grid, which will cause several conflicts for him, sounds like we could have an entirely new booth this season, save for maybe Lee Diffie. If we do have an entirely new booth, who do you expect is currently on the short list to fill those seats? IMSA is going to be a full-time endeavor for Towney. I hope we're not losing him from the IndyCar booth, though, because he has been probably the strongest analyst from a consistency standpoint and also an insight standpoint. I would say Towney has really found his niche. So while I'm glad he's going back to racing full-time, that being with our pals Jimmy Vasser and James Sully Sullivan in IMSA with a Lexus RCF GT3. I don't think there's going to be so many conflicts that Townsend not being in the booth is going to be a huge issue unless he elects to not return. Keep in mind that Lee, over the years with what was formerly F1 on NBCSN, Lee would have a number of conflicts and whatnot, yet would come in, obviously, whenever he was available. So I don't see this as a huge barrier. The only thing would be is if Towney says, nope, I don't want to do it, and that would surprise me. On the PT front, I've heard no formal support behind this, but I've heard some informal suggestions that PT might survive this latest social media row and could be back in the booth. So if that is the case, then in theory, Ryan, we would have Lee, we would have Towney, we would have PT, and not much in the way of having to bring in lots of new names, new talents. We do know that Calvin Fish, probably Lee's best friend, two of them were an amazing duo on speed for so many years doing sports car racing. We do know that Calvin is coming over to NBCSN on the IMSA side. Could there be a situation where if Lee has any other conflicts, could some form of, not necessarily just Olympic, but he does a lot of things for the channel. Could there be a situation where Calvin is rotated in for whatever number of races if someone's busy doing something else? Obviously not an IMSA race where he's there with Townsend. I would say that would be a great situation too. Calvin's just among the best of the best. So don't see a huge amount of, got to bring in a ton of new people. I think they already have a ton of really good people. Among the other changes, which you might have seen online or read about, is Katie Hargett, who's been a pit reporter for NBCSN with IndyCar. She is not back for 2019, so obviously hoping that Katie finds something awesome to do. So not sure who exactly is going to fill in her spot there, or if they're going to do some continual shuffling. So more to find out there here in the coming days and weeks. Let's jump over to Chad Smith. It says, MP, curious to know which track is your favorite to shoot during the year. He also asks, when did my passion for photography begin? He said the work is inspiring. Well, it's kind of you, Chad. There are tons who are better, but thank you. And any tips would be appreciated. Well, boy, I've mentioned this before. Road America, it just makes the most average photographer look amazing. So that's a place where the visuals, the tall trees, the green, the fans, the grandstands that tend to be packed, it's a pure delight. I just find myself in a super MP happy place around there. Mid-Ohio would fall into that as well. I really liked shooting at Portland this year. I had not shot at Portland since probably 1994 maybe, when CART was there, and I forget what series I was working in then, but that was a lot of fun. Found a lot of beautiful interaction of nature in the track. It's a park, so that maybe that makes sense. What else? Laguna, now that that's back on the schedule, there are certainly points there where I enjoy. I mean, I'm a little weird in that I like Long Beach and have always liked Long Beach and street courses. I would say Indy Turn 1, if we're just talking, oh my God, that's an experience. IMS could make money just selling tickets, almost making something like a display at the zoo where you can walk up really close and right on the other side of the glass is the lion or the grizzly bear. Turn 1 at Indy has that, where the cars are going 225, 230 miles an hour on the exit of the corner. They track out pretty close to where the photo gate is. And I'm not saying you could reach out and touch the car, but if you had really long Kevin Durant wingspan or similar, you just might be able to. And yeah, that just punch in the gut or the face of speed and wind and force, you realize that this is just something out of the ordinary, something that very few people on the planet get to experience. So yeah, Turn 1 at Indy for me is just always I don't believe I actually get to do this, and they let me walk up close, and others walk up close. It's crazy. As for quick tips, Chad, I would say, depending on the size of your glass, if you have some longer lenses, you're going to want to get a monopod. There's some photographers who pride themselves in using no assistance whatsoever, purely handheld, and many of them are phenomenal. I'm not one of them. I wish I could say my hands were perfectly still. There's no shake ever. I would say get a monopod, attach that to your longer lens, and it will help you in the panning and taking more consistently good photographs. Another thing too, which is probably my most general suggestion, is when you're starting out, or if you're early in your enthusiasm for photography and race cars, tend to focus on getting a, quote, great shot. And that great shot is often a car frozen to death on the racing circuit, something where your shutter speed is crazy high, 1/500th, 1/1000th, and I'm talking more in a pan than a head-on shot. And while everything on the car is completely crisp, so is everything else. It looks like a portrait. It looks like someone just parked a car and drew a painting of it right there. At least for me, that holds very minimal appeal. To me, I think of the basics. These are race cars, phenomenal race cars that go extremely fast. So shooting them to look like they are going 0 miles per hour, that doesn't make sense to my head. So getting that shutter speed down and panning and practicing, adding some movement, a little bit of background blur, that's my most common suggestion. It's start out at 1/250th, 1/200th, or whichever camera you happen to have. Work your way down to 1/125th, 100th. Getting below 100th is where real movement and real speed starts to jump out in those photos. You're going to have more blurry and unusable ones while you are learning to move down and use slower shutter speeds. But again, if you're trying to convey what you're actually seeing with your eye and what an IndyCar is truly doing, it's not being frozen to death in position. So work your shutter speed down, use that monopod to level the camera to remove some of the shakiness that is only amplified as you go with lower shutter speeds, and you get stuff that's a little more artful, but it's also maybe a little bit more realistic to what's taking place in front of you. Let's go to Don Davis, and we're back to Formula E a little bit. You can tell folks really want their IndyCar to get back on track. Don says, Marshall, I know you don't like gimmicks, but one thing I liked about the Formula E race on Saturday was they had a flashing light over the roll hoop when they were in the, quote, attack mode, that being the extra performance boost, basically push-to-pass equivalent for an electric race car. And he says, can't IndyCar do the same thing with push-to-pass? We could see PTP activated from head-on shots on TV. I guess if we're talking head-on, yeah. The light panels, provided we get them back, the LED panels on the sides of the roll hoop, definitely show push-to-pass. And I would say if we're talking about TV, Don, which you mentioned here, you usually have the commentators talking about, hey, I see that so-and-so is activated push-to-pass. So I know the one specific example of adding an extra light so it can be told from head-on maybe doesn't exist. So I don't know. I don't foresee it happening. I mean, I can say of all IndyCar is trying to do, I don't think that's one that is on the menu right now. But at the same time, Formula E is about trying to use fan boost, attack mode, alert, all possible things to get people to look in and care about it. And this does fit into that gimmicky mode to me, at least. Maybe it doesn't for others. So not sure what IndyCar might do with a forward-looking notice that push-to-pass has been activated, but I can certainly inquire next time I speak with Jay Frye in less than 24 hours. Let's get to our last question here. A good little notification thrown in as well. This comes from Chocophile, who says, what are the chances DragonSpeed will incorporate the Evel Knievel livery into their IndyCar program? Well, if you stay on after Hinch's interview, I spent about 15 minutes with team owner Elton Julian on the phone right after they announced their IndyCar program on Monday, and we get into that and a number of other things. Kind of a get-to-know Elton and the team conversation. Not so super in-depth, but I figure that while Elton's been around forever, he was once definitely a Alexander Rossi-type American on the international open wheel scene trying to make it to Formula One. It's a long time ago. I would say a lot of IndyCar fans today wouldn't even know Elton's name, much less the fact that he was a standout junior open wheel driver and was trying to get to F1. So anyways, going to tack that on here to the end of the show because I figure, Elton's going to be someone, while they're in for 5 races this year, they have absolutely planned to be a full team come 2020. A few things that we didn't get into in the podcast, and I'll just mention here. I've had some folks apply skepticism to DragonSpeed, show me the money type stuff. Is it real or is this just vaporware? The person who was funding this, who wasn't mentioned in the press release, he's been a part of the DragonSpeed team for a good while. He has been the financial engine behind the DragonSpeed team for a good while. What they do in the FIA WEC, in the ELMS, in LMP1, LMP2, from a cost standpoint, it's right there, if not above, what a full season of IndyCar costs. And the person, again, currently has been involved with DragonSpeed and on the funding side said, hey, I want to go IndyCar racing. That's really where the reality came into this desire that Elton had. So I think they're going to keep his name quiet a little bit. And we'll see if Elton wants to speak more about that in the coming weeks and months. But yeah, for me at least, no concerns about the money side because they are handling that internally with a person who's been very successful in business, who loves motor racing, loves driving, and has a passion for IndyCar racing that we are seeing through the purchase of a brand new Dallara DW12 chassis. Not some old donkey that they're going to have to repair, but they ponied up for a brand new car. It's expected to be here towards the end of January, very early February, and with that newly announced WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca test, following a couple days later with the official spring training test at Circuit of the Americas, they're going to be under the gun to get that chassis done, but they are going to do their best, and I believe they're going to make it. They intend to make it. It's also coming right after DragonSpeed will be competing at the Rolex 24 at Daytona with their driver Ben Hanley, who will also be their IndyCar driver. So busy times ahead. Elton dropped me a note, 4 or 5 weeks ago and said, hey, what do you know chassis-wise, who has what? And then he reached out shortly thereafter to say, hey, we're just going to buy something brand new. So it's not as if they just bought the chassis now, right when they announced the 5-race program. This is actually something that's been in the works for a little while. So again, appreciate the fact that have a desire, putting money behind it, and doing it. And Elton he's a character. He is a real character. It also looked like, for a good while, that he was going to end up partnering or maybe even having to partner with an existing team in order to get on the grid. That went away. So now we're just going to get straight up DragonSpeed in IndyCar. So yeah, looking forward to that. Look, another team coming in, another team that's interested and is self-funded. That's the dream, right? That is the dream. Everybody wishes they had someone like that saying, yeah, let's go do it. I got you financially. Order what you need. Let's go motor racing. Used to happen a lot. Doesn't happen that often these days, so pretty cool to see it happening again. With all that said, off we go with the mayor of Hinchtown, James Hinchcliffe. Apologize a little bit for some of the audio dips, but we truly kept trying to find the best solution. And then we will close things out with our man Elton Julian, talking about himself and DragonSpeed and their goals in IndyCar, all presented by Cooper Tires. James Hinchcliffe, the numbers don't lie, my friend. Looking back at the metrics from 2018, it's you and our man Robin Miller who have been the most popular guests on the Week in IndyCar. I figured what better way to close the year than to have you back. And also based on the questions that we received, which are by and large awesome and introspective or awesome and fun, you're kind of sort of someone that people happen to like.
Well, Marshall, thank you for having me back on, and thanks to the listeners, and especially my mom for repeatedly listening to the last podcast, and I'm sure boosting my numbers, and everybody that submitted questions. I'm excited. I as I told you, I was very conscientious in staying off Twitter once we kind of threw out the net, and so I've not been briefed or prepped on what's coming, and I think that's the better way to do it.
Absolutely. Here's some blindfold. Just run straight towards that wall. Everything's going to turn out fine. Let's just jump right in. And I normally try and categorize some of these things so we cover things in a thematic standpoint, but there's just such a great range. I've jumbled them all up and hope that the flow works. So we're going to go with our man James Lidicote first, who says, for the both of you, are you more excited for the return to Laguna Seca or starting something new at Circuit of the Americas? And there's a couple follow-up questions I'll throw in after. So what do you think?
Oh, man, that's a tough question, actually. That's a really good question because, on one hand, you've got one of the most historic tracks in the country, probably the most famous corner in motorsports globally, beautiful part of the country in Laguna Seca, obviously, and it's always been a dream of mine. I remember being there when, I don't know if it was considered the official lap record at the time, before they brought the F1 car over, but when Sebastian Bourdais and the DP01 in the spring training in 07 went out there and beat at least what was at the time the track record. I mean, that track is fun, it's fast and flowing, it's all the things that I love in a racetrack. Then you got COTA, obviously, which, like you say, new chapter. It's exciting. It's going to be fun to kind of race on a current Formula One circuit. Austin's a great town. There's a lot of reasons why that one's going to be great too. So to try and pick one that I'm more excited for, oh man, it's tough. Well, let's put it this way. I don't think I've ever finished off the podium at Laguna, so I'm probably slightly more excited to go back there.
No, I love that. James, I'll say Laguna Seca, and it's not because it's my home race. One of my two home races, I guess, with what we call Sears Point, a.k.a. Sonoma Raceway. I am more excited for Laguna for the long term. That's the thing that has me most excited, and that's used from a person who's been to a lot of races at COTA, not for Formula One, but for a lot of things other than Formula One. And whether it's been IMSA, the FIA World Endurance Championship, or otherwise, it's really struggled to attract a crowd, domestic crowd. The big international things, Formula One, MotoGP, it's a huge, call it fly-in or imported crowd. A lot of domestic fans too, but I've just seen that when there aren't tons of flights heading into Austin, and it's just local fans meant to hopefully turn up, hasn't been a ton of support. We hope that changes, obviously, but just having seen way too many, did they open the gates to let people into the grandstands? Because it looks like they forgot type events at COTA with something other than F1 and MotoGP. I hope IndyCar maybe breaks that trend and it can become a staple, but I do know that the money being poured into Laguna and the local interest, just the announcement, Hinch, of the not spring training as they said it was, but at the, hey, we're adding a test day thing, that really took off here locally as a, whoa, cool, amazing. So, again, hope both succeed, but I think Laguna might be the one with a longer term health for us to bank on a little bit. Let's go to Brian Smith. who says, Hinch, you've definitely had an up and down season in 2018. How much of that was a product of you adjusting to how the updated UAK 18 car handled? How much was missing the setup, 1 week on, 1 week off maybe? And how much of it was just bad luck? How do you look at your 2018 season, man?
Well, I mean, you nailed it, up and down, certainly. And I think there's a little bit of every single one of those elements at play. Certainly everybody was trying to get a handle on the UK18 kid, and I would say that for sure there were times where, I really had to adjust my driving style a little bit. It was quite different than the last car, and being able to utilize a high downforce package and all the rest of it. And that was there was definitely some unlearning that I had to do at certain tracks, which is obviously never a good thing to have to do on a race weekend with such little practice time. Obviously, another big part of it was all the big changes in personnel that we had internally, and then specifically on the 5-stand, all the changes that we had throughout the season.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of elements from the engineering side that were a challenge over the year. But I think we did find our stride at one point, and that's kind of what we've hitched our wagon on, to next year with Will Anderson stepping up full time into that role for me, and very excited about that. And man, there's no doubt about it, bad luck comes into it as well. But I'm a big believer in you make your own luck, and that certain things come down to preparation as much as they do luck. And there are things you can point out to our year and say, yeah, that was bad luck, but you could kind of work down the line and reverse engineer and say, yeah, but that all kind of comes back to this, which we could have done better as a team. Yeah. And so
let me just add on to that a little bit, knowing that we have had a change in general manager position with a great promotion from within. Now going into 2019, I've heard rumors that your chief mechanic / crew chief might have been, bumped up a little bit in responsibility as well for 2019. Maybe if you can just share some thoughts on not the 18 season, but where you see some of the team developments that might improve your 2019.
Well, yeah, the big one first and foremost, obviously, is just having one race engineer for a full season. that'll be a nice change over 18, and I think Will's incredibly capable. We won together in Iowa. We had a really good stretch, kind of mid-season there, post-Indy, together, and that's it. That's a huge one. We've had some other changes on the engineering stand, kind of between the two cars. Some guys that have been moved to shop-based roles, etc. That I'm very happy about. And then the crew chief side, Billy's been bumped up. I think in a position that is really well suited for him. I think he's going to kind of lead both cars, oversee both cars a little more, and just kind of from the mechanical side of the team, really be the guy in charge. And he's more than capable of doing it, and we're certainly going to miss him, on the 5 car specifically. But I think it's for the greater good of the team, and we've brought in a very experienced guy, a guy that I worked with at Schmidt back in the Lights days, and so we're excited to to have Dave join the team, and it's and then obviously the other big one is Marcus, and everybody's super excited to see what he's capable of. His first test went very well, as I'm sure most of you heard or read, and I think he's going to be a huge asset, and Robbie's still going to be involved in any and every capacity that he's able to, and I think having somebody as experienced and knowledgeable as him in kind of a different role is going to benefit Marcus and I, and even the engineers a great deal. To still be able to have him in on some of these conversations. So there's a lot of good things building in the team for 19.
Stoked for you guys. We've got a couple of great Robbie-related questions coming up here in just a little bit. Let's go to a great technical question early on. This comes in from Ben Ireland, who says, what sort of feedback, Hinch, do you get from the car to know when your tires are starting to degrade? And as a result, how do you then compensate to manage the car with a loss of grip? So I don't know if we want to pick an oval, a road course, street course, but maybe choose one of those scenarios and how you start to feel that inside the car and how you adapt so you don't burn those suckers up well before your next pit stop.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a long-winded answer to kind of cover all the bases. But like you say, if you sort of pick one type of track and one type of issue, and let's go with something that we experienced quite a bit this year ourselves on street courses. in the race, and that was burning the rear tires off the red Firestones. That was a big challenge for us with the street courses. And what's funny about it is sometimes the reds have what we call a grip cliff, and you'll be driving along and have a pretty okay balance one lap, and literally within 3 or 4 corners you start to feel something a little different, and by the start of the next lap the car is a completely different animal and you're hanging on for dear life. So one of the big things is honestly to try and preempt that as much as you can. If you know that's what you're going to be dealing with in the race, you're taking as good care of the tires, whichever end you're struggling with, right from the get-go. In the case of the rears, it basically comes from entry stability with the back of the car and or wheel spin on power down. One of those two things is going to start creeping into your balance as you drive. And once you feel that, you do have to make some adjustments. Obviously, if entry is the issue, you're going to have to back off your entries a little bit, not be carrying as high a brake pressure at initial turn-in, try and have more weight on the back of the car, try and keep it a little more in control. And then if it's a power down oversteer issue, you try to hold off on getting to the throttle until you have a straighter steering wheel, a little less lock in it, and obviously being just more progressive on applying the throttle and not letting those rear tires spin, because once they start spinning, it's so hard to get them back, and the surface temperature of the tires skyrockets, and it takes a bit for that grip to sort of come back. So, it's a different deal on ovals. It's a different deal if it's the front tires, but in that particular case, those are the kind of things that you would do to pick up on when the tires were going and kind of how to manage them from there.
And this isn't meant to be a morose example, but I have always thought of this, what you're referring to with the rear tires going away. It could be the fronts, but in particular the rears, at least from a race engineering mindset, of a cut. If you are sensing and feeling that the rear tires are wanting to break away, spin, do all the things you mentioned. The carcass is getting hotter, you're simply wearing more rubber off from the wheel spin. If you can mitigate that, it ends up being a smaller cut. Going to bleed a little bit, it's going to hurt you, but it's not going to be the end of the world. If you're in a position where through not adjusting your driving style, or maybe you've maxed out your anti-roll bar, your brake bias adjustments, and it continues happening, it's just a much bigger cut. You're going to bleed faster. You're going to be in serious peril. So I just have always thought of it in terms of like, ooh, okay, this isn't fun, but let's keep it a little nick, a little pinprick, instead of like the gaping wound. You're like, all right, I'm finished.
Right.
So yeah, but at the same time, this also speaks to, I guess, driving and engineering talent, right? Your race engineer, assistant engineer, they can pick out what's happening, even if the radios, had failed. They should be able to pick up what's happening inside the car through looking at telemetry. Tell me about just general sense of how you and your engineer would work through a dynamic like this, because it's going to happen. But it's also a matter of how quickly you recognize it and how quickly either you or your engineer in tandem come up with a plan to try and fix it as much as possible. They're somewhere better at that than others, which probably reflects in race results too.
Yeah, again, another great question. And there's like a real life scenario here that we actually experienced this year. And like I said, the street courses for us on the reds, that was our big struggle, was always taking care of the rear tires. We were good at using them over a lap in qualifying, but then making them last a stint was a little more of a challenge for us. And so going into the race, the engineers are knowing that we've got to try and make the rears last. But we had issues in St. Pete, we had issues in Long Beach, and when we got to Detroit, we were very cognizant of it. I was driving very cautiously with the rear of the car, and the engineers came on the radio at one point and said, "Hey James, just remember to look after those rear tires." And I thought to myself, I am looking after the rear tires. I've been looking after the rear tires. What are they talking about? And sure enough, not a lap later, started to feel that cliff and started to feel that rear grip go away, because there was something on telemetry that they specifically saw to kind of give me a little bit of a warning, like, hey, this is coming. And so I was able to adapt much quicker and, adjust what I was doing in the car. And as you said, the roll bars and brake bias and all the tools we have in the car, I was able to kind of preempt it a little bit and stay ahead of it better than we had in previous races. So it was interesting that you have to have that trust in them that even when you haven't felt it in the car yet, there are signs that they can pick up in telemetry to kind of give you a heads up.
Well, speaking of heads up, which is something we've been wanting to do here, we've been wanting to talk about this little podcast of yours, Off Track.
Oh, I thought you were going to say playing the game Heads Up, which is also a lot of fun. You should really try it.
Okay, I'm feeling old here because I don't know what that is.
You don't know what Heads Up is?
No.
Oh man, it's like when you have you can download it. It's an app now. You put your phone up to your forehead and it says like a movie or a famous person, and you got to try and.
My wife and I did that last year, right around this time. I think it was one of Nick Cannon's apps, and we lasted about a half hour, and then decided that we had done all of that we needed to. So yeah, all right, I'm remembering. My brain isn't always good at that. Our man Brian Cohn says, how did Hinch and Rossi get connected for their off-track podcast, and what is the story behind, quote, THIM, THIM, question mark?
Well, there is no story behind THIM. There's nothing anybody needs to know about THIM ever. THIM is an inconvenience and an unfortunate necessity in the world of off-track with Hinch and Rossi. That's all I have to say. That's all I have to say about THIM.
Very forceful. Very forceful.
What's actually funny about that, to answer the first part of the question, is THIM is the reason that Alex and I ended up on that show together. It was a mutual, he's a mutual friend of the two of us, and it was someone he knew that had interest in some original content podcasting, and he thought it would be a great idea to do one with the two of us, and came to us with it, and obviously we were on board right away. And it's been fun, man. It's been an interesting journey. We're kind of coming up on almost 8-9 months now. I think we've been doing it. And it's been a way to meet some really cool people for sure, and I think connect with fans in a cool way. I think people have really enjoyed certain things that we've done. And just to get a chance to kind of hang out. I mean, Rossi and I are good buddies, away from the track. We both live in Indy. We train together, and we spend a lot of time together. And so kind of getting a fun little outlet to vent about things or just discuss general topics, racing or otherwise. It's kind of been fun, and getting to share it with everyone has been fun as well.
I think one of the things I've enjoyed, and I would be lying if I said I've caught every episode, but I've tried to listen to as many as I can. We sometimes joke that, hey, someone needs to remind Rossi to plug in his human emotion chip.
Yeah, he's got good days and bad days with that, for sure.
Yeah, but it seems like there's more of him coming out in this. And, yeah, granted, he's still a youngish guy, so I don't expect someone in their mid-20s or so to be a, fully evolved human being that can cite poetry and pontificate about the great jazz musicians and whatnot, but he just seems like someone that, as the podcast has gone on, the two of you, there's not only a great friendship, but, a level of comfort where he can just be more of him, whatever that is, but he can just let more of himself out. Could be a cranky guy one day, could be a fun, jovial guy the other, but do you see more of, whatever the real Alexander Rossi is? Do you see more of him coming out in the podcast? Because if so, man, you're doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's been one of the really cool things for IndyCar fans and for Alex Rossi fans. It's really given them the opportunity to learn a little bit more about what he's just like as a dude, and he's a pretty cool dude. And at the racetrack, so many people, it's not uncommon, man. Guys are so different at the track than they are away from it. And this has been a really cool tool for Alex to sort of just be himself, like you say. And whether it's happy Alex, whether it's cranky Alex, you never know what you're going to get. He's the Forrest Gump box of chocolates in that sense. But that's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it fun, and keeps me and keeps all the listeners on their toes a bit.
I mentioned before we started recording that I recently had a dream involving Alexander Rossi. I don't know if sharing it would actually disturb him too much. So Maybe
that's yeah. I don't know. Sleep on that one. See what happens. Yeah. You have another dream about him, and then maybe it's time to bring something up.
Jesus. If there's a second one that comes up there, we are doing a Venmo, GoFundMe something, Pruitt's Psychotherapy Fund. Yeah. That is for damn sure. Brian Cohn asks the second question. He says, do you ever just want to sneak over to your parents and jump in that X-Grig Moore Van Diemen Formula Ford and take it out for laps around the neighborhood? And he says, please bring yourself and that car to any of the many 50th anniversary U.S. Formula Ford events in 2019.
Well, that's a great point. And the goal was actually to get that car down to Indianapolis in the next, 4 to 6 months. So I'd say there's a totally unrealistic chance that happens, hopefully in 19, but if not, certainly in the future, because I'm going to get it down here, get it prepped, and get ready to go racing in it again.
That's where I started. One of the main things I started on was as a young Formula Ford mechanic. So, and having spent a little bit of my life racing Formula Ford, it's life, man. I don't want to sound old-timey, but there's so many cool race cars today. Formula Ford still exists, but just some of these 70s, 80s, 90s Formula Fords, it's just, makes the world go round.
They're the best.
Let's jump over to a fun one here. We've got two folks asking similar things. Jamie Carr and Zachary Burcham. Jamie says, given that you and Robert's reenactment of the scene from Days of Thunder, do you guys have any more scenes the two of you want to reenact? And Zachary asks, whose idea was it for the Days of Thunder homage video, and any funny stories about how that came to be?
Yes, to all of the above. Well, I'll tell you one thing. We're definitely not going to reenact the sugar packet scene. But, I mean, I think the logical answer to that is the rental car scene would be the next best one to reenact. So, stay tuned to social media channels near you, because hopefully one day we'll be able to go beat up on some old rental cars. And that, honestly, man, this I love this story because it just shows everybody, how much Rob's hung on to his sense of humor and just who he is and who's always been his idea. It was very, very early on, in his recovery, that he said to me, he's like, dude, what we got to do is we got to reenact the rental car, the wheelchair scene from Days of Thunder. And I mean, obviously I'm in. I mean, I'm never going to not be in for something like that. And we just had to wait for the timing to be right. And we were out there visiting him, and it was time to do it. And the funniest story, so like this is the hard part, right? Okay, we're gonna get a little real here for a second. I might get myself in trouble with this, but we're planning on doing this, but to do it, we have to steal a wheelchair for me to use, right? So we're like in this hospital, and I walk in, dressed in a hoodie and a baseball cap, and then all of a sudden, me and Robbie wheel out, and I'm in a wheelchair with a blazer on and a button-up shirt, Tom Cruise style. And it was very hard. People were no one could figure out what exactly was happening or whether I was one person or two different people. It was a very kind of weird situation. And there was actually a minor injury reported during the filming of this, where my thumb got stuck in the brake of one of the wheels and ripped a not insignificant amount of skin off my thumb.
Oh.
It was like cheese grater style, like road rash.
Oh.
And the best part of it was I was leaving the next day to be on set filming something, and my fiance Becky looked at that and she was like, makeup's not going to be happy with you over that, because I had this giant open wound on my hand now, and I had to be on camera the next day. So it was, but it was totally worth it. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Well, we're looking forward to whatever part 2 there might be. I don't know if we need to reenact. Maybe we do need to reenact Boats and Hose. I mean, we got some Step Brothers angles. I could see this being an ongoing thing. It leads in...
Robbie and I could we can recite pretty much that entire movie verbatim. So,
all right.
I mean, we could do a Boats and Hose video, no problem.
I will volunteer my directorial skills or whatever's needed. We can get this done. Next question takes things in a little more serious direction, but it's one of the reasons that we enjoy you, Hinch, is that you're capable of dipping in and out of whatever direction we need. Cale Peister says, how hard was it for you and the team to get back in the car at Gateway this summer, that being following Robbie's big accident, life-transforming accident at Pocono? He said, was skipping the event ever considered?
I don't think skipping the event was ever really considered. But at the same time, it sucked. It sucked in every possible capacity. Just having it been literally the week before, it still being so fresh. We weren't, and then on top of it, we weren't one of the teams that tested. We only had the one car worth of data. My hands were still pretty banged up, and I know I wasn't at my 100%. And and then the way the race played out was like worst case scenario for us as well. So it was one of those weekends, man, where we all kind of knew we had to do it, but none of us really wanted to do it. But we have a job to do, and we've got partners that we have to answer to, and that we represent and we respect, and we wanted to go out and do our job for. And I'm sorry, as a team, I'm sorry that we couldn't go out there and have done a better job for them and for Rob and for everybody. But it was a very tough situation, and I give every single member of the team a lot of credit for just kind of buckling down and getting through what was a difficult weekend, emotionally and from an on-track standpoint, all the different elements that went into it. It was easily one of the most challenging weekends I think we've all been through.
Cale also asks, possibly the most important question of the episode: is there any way to get Hinchtown Hammer down in southern Ontario?
That is a work in progress, my friend. As of right now, the answer is no, but it is an avenue we are exploring feverishly.
And how, by the way, and I think there's definitely some criticism warranted here, how have you not had the refueling probe and hose plugging into your number 5 Aero Honda branded to look like a Hinchtown beer can? I mean, come on, man. I figured that would just be already a done deal.
That is a tremendous point, and that is something that we will obviously be now investigating.
See, look at that.
Next year. Yeah, that's a great idea.
We're making changes. We're improving the world here. Let's go to our man, Victor Rad, who's at TWRJag. Twitter handle is something I'm very jealous of. He says, serious question. From a driver's point of view, if IndyCar were to open up some limited car development avenues for the teams, where would you like those to be, and where should they be to keep the competition level as good as it is right now? So, all right, Hinch, technical director.
Man, I mean, the problem is those are almost conflicting ideas. Car development and essentially pace equality across teams, they don't really go hand in hand. The one thing that would be handy is if there were some relaxations on some of the bodywork rules, just in terms of, with the new kit, they have made a spec set of things like wickers and the rest of it for front and rear wings, and it really, really limits your downforce options, your drag options on a lot of the tracks. And the problem with that is it means that there's because the options are so narrow, the best one is usually very obvious, which means everybody ends up on it. So there's very little variation. There's not a lot of opportunities to be like, you know what, we're going to take a risk and do a little less downforce at this oval, because the step from A to B is just so big, with very little drag gain, that it's totally not worth it. So you end up with most of the cars on pretty close to the exact same settings, which, that takes some of the fun out of it. So if they were to relax some of that, allow us to create some of our own wickers and maybe some other, bits and pieces and bolt-ons for the bodywork, I think that could be cool. I understand the reluctance to, because that just leads to tons of wind tunnel time, which is very expensive and time-consuming. So I get why why they've kind of kept away from that. But, we went from a kit the last 3 years where we probably had legitimately a million derivatives of aero options if you added them all together, to one that has about 6. And so I just think it was too big a step, and it sort of handcuffed the teams a little bit too much.
Victor, I'll throw this in, and I've been banging this drum for probably since the DW12 came out, maybe even longer. The one thing that I know has maybe dipped a little bit, Hinch, in recent years, with maybe so many production cars being just automatic. They're just, the average commuter car is just that. It's a tool. It's not a huge point of oh my God, I want to learn everything about it, become a car nerd. The one thing that I do know that folks today seem to care a lot about is phone, tablet-based technology. And so the thing I've always thought would be great for IndyCar to open is to open not only the dash display, but maybe some of the related electronics on the car to make it, I guess, more enticing for a Samsung, an Apple, a Google, a you name it, to get involved, to use IndyCar as the proverbial 200-mile-an-hour laboratory, but also in areas of advancement. Could it be something on the engine management side? Could it be the telemetry and data side? I know that we had Verizon in the series, and they did a little bit of stuff around promoting their external stuff. There was nothing on board that was Verizon, but just thinking, how do we get more big-name, big-brand companies who make the things that we all carry in our pocket or use on an airplane or, in the break room? How do we connect that, which we all seem to want the latest and greatest and to know how it's faster and more Wi-Fi-ish and you name it? How do we merge those worlds and use IndyCar as a place where you, sitting in your car, now have a wraparound display, touch, an actual touch screen display, something where you want to test this in a really hard, rigorous environment to find out, how it performs and lasts? Well, invest in a team. Hey, again, Samsung. Maybe you can work with Schmidt, and there's a business relationship, and maybe Apple works with pick whomever. Seems like a way where the person sitting in the stands might be interested to learn about the electronic and technological developments there, because it relates to what they have, and there could be some pretty good B2B or dollar exchange, I would think. So that's the thing, Victor. I've been hoping IndyCar would open that up, so I'm going to remain hopeful and vigilant. Let's see. All right, if we're talking about crazy folks, Hinch, Brad at BZAD sent in 10 questions on Twitter in a manner of about 4 seconds. And of the 10, I chose the one that I liked the most. He said, after moving to America to pursue your racing career, how long did it take you to learn English? I mean, you aren't it. I keep reading about immigrants and stuff on the internet and border walls or stuff. So I don't know how you got here. I assume you're legal. We're a couple leaps of faith, but your English is good. He does have a point.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate that you like my English. I'm more curious as when the rest of this country is going to learn it.
Well,
because you guys have this weird aversion to the letter U. You drop it off a lot of words that need it.
What's a good example?
Color, neighbor, favor. You guys don't like the U's, and unfortunately, English comes from a little place a couple miles east of here called England. And in England, the Queen, she's kind of the boss over there.
Meghan Markle.
Meghan Markle, yes. She throws a bunch of U's into words that you guys know. So you guys kind of have American, which is words that don't have U's and are y'all, like things like that. That's American. Yeah. So I speak Canadian technically because we do some weird stuff of our own. The one thing that American English is better at or I like better about American English than English is the ERRE thing, like center and theater. We spell RE, CENTRE rather than CNTR.
Yes.
Yeah, Centra. It says I don't like that. So I'm with you on that one. But you need to get the U's back in your words, guys. And the one thing that I will say, and there's no debate on this, the last letter of the alphabet is Z. It is not Z. You made that up so it rhymed better with the alphabet song. But no other English-speaking country on Earth says Z. It's Z. And I'll give you 2 exceptions. Jay-Z, because JZ sounds silly, and ZZ Top, because ZZ Top is just ridiculous.
Yeah, but I got to push back on this one, because just about every country that I know of, particularly in Europe, that uses Z, they put mayonnaise on their French fries, man. And so that's just a whole other political explosion that, you know, if we're talking people you're saving when the world's collapsing, yeah, the mayo on French fries being used by folks who say Z instead of Z, I think that might be the line where I draw who I save and who I don't.
It's a solid argument.
Okay.
I don't have there's not a lot of a whole argument. It's a weird world. It's a world.
I've done studies.
We disagree on fry condiment usage. I think we still need to be on the same page verbally and at least speaking the same language.
Where does poutine fit into this argument? Because it's not a mayo thing, but there's fries, but there's other good... Maybe we save the poutine eaters. Maybe that's the solution here.
So Canada gets through. Even though we're not big mayo on fries, people. We're definitely ketchup and gravy, apparently. Gravy and cheese. I don't know.
Anything other than ketchup, you're starting to push the boundaries of acceptable French fry condiments. But again, you know, my goal for 2019 is to be a more tolerant person. So I have work to do.
I think once you get past ketchup, you're pushing the boundaries on condiments for a lot of things: hamburgers, hot dogs, steak, waffles, Twinkies. You know, I feel like ketchup's really all you need.
I've heard some things lately where folks are saying that anyone who puts ketchup on a hot dog is a member of ISIS. I would argue the opposite. Anyone who leaves ketchup off of a hot dog, I might need to see your papers, man. I'm not sure where you're coming from. It's probably not the planet Earth, but you know, if there's one takeaway from this episode of the Week in IndyCar Hinch, we have very clear feelings on condiments, O's, U's, and otherwise. So I'm going to try and get this back on the rails a little bit. We're going to go to 2 friends here of the show, John Jansen and also Ryan Terpstra. Ryan starts off with, I don't have a question, just a thank you. Thank you, James, for being a good friend to Robert Wickens. Thank you for continuing to stick with him. He is exciting for the series, and the 2 of you continue to bring exciting racing to our social media feeds. And John says, love that you're a great friend to Wiki. Can you talk about your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions about the road ahead for him? So we're going from fun back into a little more serious stuff.
Well, thank you for the sentiment. Obviously, I mean, he's my best bud. We've been friends for a long time, and this doesn't change that at all. And my thoughts on the road ahead for him are almost exclusively controlled by the attitude that he has kind of taken this whole thing with and is dealing with this whole situation with, because his attitude couldn't be better. And I know a lot about it, and I've read a lot about it, and how much your mindset and your attitude have an effect on how the body heals. And I can assure you all that, Robbie is he's healing as quickly as possible because his attitude is just great. And seeing how he has dealt with the situation and how he is conducting himself and how he is preparing himself, it gives me a lot of confidence in where he ends up. It makes it, I think, that much easier to be a part of and kind of, sharing this journey with him, because I really don't think you could write a script for somebody to follow and do a better job than what he's doing in terms of how he's pushing himself, but, listening to the advice of the doctors and how he's, breaking all the records they're setting for him, all the bars are setting for him. He's above and beyond. But he's realistic, and he's being patient in the right ways at the right times, and he's still just Robbie. He still has a sense of humor, and so all of those things I think are serving him incredibly well. And selfishly, it serves me well too, because as a friend, watching a friend go through something like that, just seeing how he's dealing with it, I think, is helping a lot of people around him deal with it as well. So he's the one in the tough spot right now, but honestly, he's doing as much for everybody else as everyone else is trying to do for him.
Mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again in a kind of end-of-year column that I'm writing. While I hate the fact that Robert has joined the likes of Alex Zanardi and Billy Monger in drivers who have faced immense personal adversity and challenges, yet have turned that not into a pity party, but maybe I can also inspire others and become more than just a person afflicted by whatever physical damage or obstacle to overcome, but become someone who now isn't just someone folks are rooting for, hey, get better, but wow, this person is actually bringing light to my life. I'm really down about I lost my job, my girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it is left me. Hey, okay, wow, this guy is making, making me cry from watching him going through physical therapy. He's tears flowing down his face, but he is bound and determined to walk again. Good Lord, this guy has gone from being a race car driver I liked to, a personal fountain of inspiration. That's pretty amazing, man, because you could easily go the other way. F you, world. Screw you, world, and the cruel blow you dealt me. I'm just going to focus on me. He's been the opposite.
He really has, and the other incredible thing about it is just how much of the journey he's sharing with everybody. The number of people that have commented since seeing the videos of him on the machines, up on his feet and trying to walk, and you can see the pain, you can see the effort he's going through. It's massively motivating to people, but a lot of guys in that situation wouldn't have done that. A lot of times you hear about an incident like this, and then it's the talk for a week or two, and then everybody kind of keeps going, and the talk quiets down, and then 6, 8, 12, 18 months later, the person returns, and it's very good to see them again and all the rest of it. But there is this massive lull of information in the middle where I have no idea what it was like for Alex Zanardi from when he got back to the States until he showed up at, I think it was the race in Toronto was the first one he came to, and I was at that race and I saw him there. But nobody saw what that transformation was like for him, what that journey was like for him. And, Rob's made the very conscious decision of kind of sharing that with everybody. And I think it's incredible. I think it's incredibly brave, first of all. It's really letting your guard down. It's letting yourself be vulnerable in front of literally the entire world. And I think it's really admirable behavior. And the knock-on effect is, it's inspiring so many people on a daily basis. And so, while he's going through it to get himself better, at the same time, he's helping a lot of other people get themselves better. And that's just incredible.
The Naked Yoga with Robert Wickens video series is coming out. I'm looking forward to that. Glad to hear you're guest starring too. So, boy,
Watch out for the downward dog, let me tell you.
Jesus. All right, I'm going to mass the throttle a little bit. We got so many great questions to get through, so let's get rocking and rolling. This comes in from Joshua Reneker. He says, Hinch, firstly, I want to commend you on your attitude in handling of the Indy 500 qualification failure. It shows that you have true character. His question is regarding your activity outside the car. Who has been your biggest influence on how to handle things outside the car? And I guess in this case, the adversity of Indy. Is that Jer Bear, or who else has been someone that kind of gave you insights on how to be the man in and out of the car?
Yeah, I mean, it's, well, first of all, thanks for the comments. I appreciate that, because it was a very tough situation. And for sure, my dad and my family in general have a huge impact on that. And a lot of it comes, honestly, from having watched other sports as a kid, especially obviously racing, and seeing certain situations and seeing how certain guys behaved, and having conversations with my dad about, like, yeah, that's how you'd want to do that. Like, that guy's a pro, or like, that's exactly what you don't want to say in that situation, and just kind of learning a little bit about, what to do from other people. And, luckily we haven't had a situation quite like that to have had to dealt with in that way. But, when it came up, I'm proud of how the team in general was able to kind of respond and conduct ourselves, and for sure I think my dad was a big influence in that, and like I said, just wanting to make sure that my family was proud of whatever I said at that moment, that my team was proud of whatever I said at that moment, that the fans and the sponsors were proud of whatever I said at that moment. It's one of those situations where the things you can't control. And the only thing we could control at that point was the message and how we reacted to it. And I sat in the car, took a breath, made a conscious decision to not make an ass out of myself. And, I'd like to think that we at least accomplished that goal, if nothing else, that day.
I was hoping you were going to jump out and say, we're going to Disneyland. But, again, we've got hopes for the future, man. Let's go to our pal Adrian, whose Twitter handle, IndyCar UK, is one that I think some IndyCar fans know. Adrian says, our boss, the Queen, delivers her Christmas message to the citizens of the Commonwealth on Christmas Day. What would your Christmas message be to your citizens, those who live within Hinchtown?
My God, this is so good. I
told you the questions are awesome.
They are, and you're not wrong. And I appreciate this submission, and I'm going to give you credit. It was Adrian, you said, right?
Yes.
I'm going to give you credit, Adrian, on the day, but I can't answer the question now because you've just given me the idea to give an actual Christmas address to the citizens. And so I will now do that from the frigid, frozen north, dressed in a onesie. And like I said, you'll be credited, but I can't tell you what it's going to be now because I have to share it with the world on Christmas. But thank you for that idea. Yes, that is brilliant.
At IndyCar UK. So, and we're not talking a photo and some texts that you've typed onto Instagram. We're talking video here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I will wear a mauve dress just like she normally does. And no, I'm kidding.
Oh, this is awesome, Adrian. We're starting very important things, and also big thanks to Hinch for hanging in here. I know we're doing our best with audio connection quality. We've tried about 4 different things, so it dips in and out a little bit, but we are doing our absolute best here. Let's see. All right, David Simmons, speaking of best, what is your best story you've never told about living with Connor Daly? And we should maybe rephrase that. Connor Daly living with you, because you are a man who takes pride in his life and would never submit to living with Connor Daly.
I had the privilege of having Connor as a roommate for, about 18 months. And the best story I've never told about it, man, that's a struggle because I've told a lot of great stories, and anything above and beyond that probably can't be repeated on a podcast. Yeah,
that's fair enough. I mean, if he is someone who live streamed his life, there would just be constant visits by the police. Well, so,
do you remember the movie Ed TV?
I do.
With Matthew McConaughey?
Yes.
I feel like Connor needs that. I feel like that would be, I would watch that all day. I would subscribe to CD TV, and I would just have it constantly running in the background because his life is just, it's incredible.
I also think you just came up with the solution to the problem for the kid, and that is, he's always looking for money to want to continue his IndyCar career. I'd fork out $9.95 for an annual subscription to CDTV. So maybe he's just found his own way to fund an IndyCar career. I know a lot of people, at least those at bars who miss him, would love to check in and see how their boy is doing. Let's go to Andy Bauer, who asks another very pertinent question. Is Marcus Ericsson at all prepared to have you as a teammate?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I'm going to conservatively say no. I think he knows a little bit about me. We got the chance to meet very briefly in passing at the airport, actually, which was kind of a funny separate story. But yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, his test in Sebring I wasn't at, so we didn't even get that time to kind of break him in easily. It's going to be interesting when we get into the cars for the first time together and go through our first full weekend. I'm not sure if he knows what's coming, but I can tell you I'm very sure that he's ready for whatever we throw at him.
He's going to be a better man. by the end of the season. B, this is tipping a hand at a question we'll hopefully get to towards the end, but I am positive he will have a love for Tim Hortons when he's done. If not,
can only hope.
We might have to lobby Jay Frye to rescind his IndyCar competition license. He's going to be a better man. I mean, I recommend to most folks, meet a Canadian, get to know a good Canadian, more English Canadian, I'll admit. You know, knowing a French Canadian, not so bad. English Canadian, way better. But they're going to enrich your life in interesting ways. So I know Marcus has some good stuff coming. And just in the middle of this conversation, just received an email, which, although no one asked about it, I'm going to ask about it and mention this. Just received a note here saying, hey, want to give you a heads up that on Wednesday, December 19th, the American Red Cross will induct IndyCar driver James Hinchcliffe into the Indiana Region Hall of Fame. I would have to assume that's not just because they like you, but because you have been doing some really good work, my man, of creating blood drives at IndyCar events and really trying to, pay back some of those pints that you had to use to save your own life not too many years ago. So maybe just give us a little bit of update on this ongoing James Hinchcliffe Giving Back initiative.
Yeah, it's quite an honor, actually. I found out a little while ago that they were planning on doing that, and I don't feel like I've been involved in the cause long enough, or certainly am even old enough to be in a Hall of Fame of any kind, but I'll take the honor. And, you know, for me, after my accident, learning a little bit more about kind of how precarious the blood situation is in this country and the overwhelming need for it basically at all times. You know, I've always said I didn't want somebody to have to go through or know somebody that went through what I did to really get an appreciation and an understanding. So more than anything, I'm just trying to create awareness. And in the process of that, obviously we've thrown a bunch of blood drives and have collected hundreds of units of blood, which is just phenomenal. But for us, it's just the start. We've got pretty lofty goals moving forward, and it includes a mobile unit that comes to every single IndyCar event. And you know, we're making moves and making progress to getting that happening at some point. But it's like I said, it's a huge honor. Thanks to everybody at the Red Cross for that. And as I said, we're just kind of scratching the surface of what I think we could do towards what I think is an incredible cause.
All right, brother, I know that we are winding down on your availability here, so let me start to pick and choose through some of the remaining awesome questions, and apologies to those who I won't be able to get to. Jim Johnstone says, hi guys, Hinch, what race car, past or present, would you love to have 10 laps in? And he says, if IndyCar could come to any track in Canada, where do you want to go? Mo Sport Montreal, a new street circuit perhaps. And Alan Bandy asked something similar of knowing your love of Greg Moore. If you could drive one of his old Renards someday, what track are you taking it around? So we might have a little merging of questions here.
For sure. I mean, I'll touch on the Canadian tracks first, and the answer is everything you just said. Montreal, Mo Sport, and a straight race in Calgary. Those would be, you know, my dream scenarios. I think Montreal makes the most sense. Mo Sport would be awesome to drive an IndyCar. I think it would be a terrible race in an IndyCar. It's just my opinion. And yeah, if we could get another race out west, I mean, with the success of Vancouver and Edmonton, it'd be great to see Calgary pick up a straight race and try to carry on that tradition. As far as the car goes, man, I'd love to drive one of Greg's cars. You know, those things were beasts back in the day, the 900 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower, you know, Mercedes engines at the time for him. And taking it to a place like Laguna would be pretty spectacular. Some of the big ovals would have been fun, you know, Michigan and Fontana. Milwaukee obviously would have been cool. He won there. Driving his Milwaukee car at Milwaukee would probably be a pretty eye-opening experience. So yeah, there's a lot of cool cars from that era I'd love to take for a spin.
My pal Simon Spikert from Edmonton asked a question as well, and he says, on last week's show I mentioned the rumor of IndyCar going back to Edmonton, and I apologize because if I said Edmonton, I meant Calgary, so it wouldn't be a going back, but actually going to, and mentioning hearing more rumors about that gaining momentum. So I know that one of your team owners, Rick Peterson, would be very fond of making that happen and is trying to. So I hope we have great news in the near future that we will be going to Canada twice, because at least when I was growing up and working as a mechanic or whatever else in the sport, going to Vancouver, going to Toronto, going to, you name it, multiple trips to Canada each year. That was just what we did, and it was the best. So, left a lot of money behind in your beloved home country. Speaking of money, Barry Lee asks, and you don't have to get too involved here if you don't want to, but curious what a driver pays for their racing helmet and the approximate cost to have it professionally painted. And I'll mention up front, Barry, that in many cases, probably not all, and if you're not one of them, it just tells you to do a better job. A lot of the better-known helmet companies have direct relationships with IndyCar athletes and others where they might have to pay for helmets, but the painting side, what does a Hinchtown lid cost, or can you at least give us a range of what you've spent over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your scheme. I mean, understandably, different schemes have different amount of labor hours that go into it, different types of paint, and if you're doing chrome, for example, that usually adds a cost, and every logo that you add adds a cost, and they kind of range, I would say, typically from about $800 to about $1,500 for a paint job, kind of depending, and then. Are you doing the Xylon strip painted to match the helmet design? That's another cost as well. So there's a couple of different factors. But yeah, I mean, you could safely say kind of average in the 1,200-ish region for a paint scheme.
And big thanks to our friends at Bell Racing Helmets who have been a kind patron of the podcast this year. Let's see, where should we go next? Stephen White, as a fellow Canadian to Paul Tracy, how was he received in the Canadian racing community when you were growing up? And did you look up to him?
I mean, Paul was such a unique character, because in a lot of ways he was anti-Canadian. He wasn't the polite guy saying sorry all the time that we often get typecast as. Paul was a bruiser. He was a guy that was wreckers or checkers. That was really Paul's kind of MO. And that honestly resonated with a lot of people. The fact that he was no holds barred, he would push 10/10ths every lap of the race. They weren't the PC responses that we're all sort of trained to give, and he really just was himself. And I think a lot of people, they really kind of resonated with him and identified with him because of how it really was. He was Paul Tracy. He was kind of crazy. Didn't mind risking it all to go for a win, and I think people really respected that. And so, yeah, I definitely cheered for Paul as a kid, and was always happy to see him win, especially with the couple times he won in Toronto. But no, he was definitely a light sportsman in the country, when he was in his prime.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes to go. I'm going to rifle through. We're going to go to Joshua Crome, who says, James and Marshall, what's your favorite donut to get at Tim Hortons?
Maple dip.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it's hard to go beyond that. Kreller. That's
a cruller.
I know that's the Americans. We call it. I realize. Okay, maybe this is another thing. Is there a U in there that I'm missing? Or is that?
No, it's there. You're just not saying it.
Oh, but see, I'm trying to be American here. Wasn't that one of your charges earlier? Let's go to Jerry Sudduth. Jerry says, I've heard you're a big fan of bourbon. Have you considered seeing if Buffalo Trace, and then in brackets Pappy Van Winkle, or Woodford Reserve would help sponsor your car? You'd be a heck of a spokesman. Racing and hard alcohol definitely goes together.
Hey, it's won championships in Indy 500s before, so I'm not against it. And no, I have not specifically approached those groups, though it's not a terrible idea. It may be something we'll have to investigate in the future. # will race for product.
We're going to go back to our friend Ryan Terpstra, who says, please don't retire anytime soon, but has anyone in movies or TV approached you about a career after racing that you can talk about? He says, our boy Robin Miller has been promoting you as a late-night TV host for years.
Robin just wants a job as a key grip on
He just wants 10%. That's all he's looking for. It's a retirement plan. He's not being nice to you.
Oh, man. Honestly, no. I've not really investigated that too much. I mean, I don't think like the movie world is in my future. That's for sure. We've got an actor in the family. Becky's the professional in that sense, so we'll let her carry on with that. But yeah, who knows what the future holds? Like you say, hopefully that's still a ways away, and I got some time to figure it out. Maybe what I want to do between then and now changes, and so there's not a whole lot of point looking too deep into it.
I'm seeing game show host, man. That seems like that's a pocket for you. Mary Jacobs says, since you and Becky are both from the same area in Toronto, after you finish racing, would you consider returning to that area to live and raise a family, or would you consider continuing to live in Indianapolis or somewhere else in the U.S.?
You know, I think the answer is yes to all of those. Certainly, you know, I've been in Indy for 10 years already. 11 years, 10 years, 10 years, and you know, and Becky's been here 2 and a bit, and we very much have built a life here, and again, the plan is to still be here for some time. Once racing stops, I think it's going to be hard to leave completely, but we definitely have a desire to spend more time back home in Canada, and mainly up at the cottage. Maybe not from exactly the area that we grew up, but you know, up north of the city where we have a cottage, and you know, that's where we're getting married. That's where we got engaged. It's really one of our favorite places on earth. So I think it'd be split probably between a couple spots when retirement comes, if we can, you know, if we're lucky enough to have that situation.
All right, got 3 fast ones to close. DVO Ferguson says, you seem down for pretty much anything, but has there been a stunt or promotional opportunity that you just had to say no to on the grounds that it was just too damn silly?
There's definitely been a couple little things, but the one I really remember was we did a shoot for GoDaddy back in 2012. I want to say it was my first year with GoDaddy, and it was for the 500, and we did this little video, and it showed during the pre-race broadcast. So it might even been like an ABC sort of instigated thing, because it wasn't like a commercial. And it was kind of me training for winning the Indy 500 sort of thing. And one of the things they wanted to do, so all these funny little like Rocky montage video kind of things, me doing different things. But one of the things they wanted to do was have me practice pouring milk on myself. And while I have no qualms about being covered in milk, there was like and this is well documented, Marshall. We've spoken about it. I've spoken about it at length. But I'm not a super superstitious guy. But that one seemed off to me. I was kind of like, I feel like you shouldn't pour milk on yourself until you've like earned the right to pour milk on yourself.
And it's also very Def Leppard video-esque.
Right. I don't have the hair for that. So I kindly opted out of that particular one, which as soon as I said that, the producer was like, yeah, no, totally. I actually had zero thought that you would say yes to it. I just had to ask the question. I was like, cool, I'm glad we're on the same page. Good.
All right, Bart Wegner says, this is an interesting one. Is it bad for competition that most drivers are either friends, roommates, sports car teammates, or podcast partners? Is everyone too friendly to really stick it to their fellow driver turning in on them?
Well, so to keep it topical, I'll point to, if you're, you know, either a general sports fan or specifically a basketball fan, right? I mean, Dwayne Wade and LeBron James just had their sort of final game together before T-Wade retires, and those guys were teammates and great friends, but also bitter competitors. On the court, I think their records were 16-15 against each other after that last game. LeBron just pipped them. So what I'm getting at is those guys had some monumental battles on court as competitors, you know, not as teammates. But at the same time, they're still great friends. And I think actually, in a lot of cases, it makes those rivalries sometimes a little better because they're more pure. Rivalries between drivers that genuinely dislike each other come from a bad place. You know, it's not about you wanting to be successful. It's about wanting the other guy to fail, almost. Do you know what I mean? It's almost the difference between that. And I think we're motivated to beat each other just as much as if we hated each other. But at the end of the day, you know, the rivalry is more fun. I think we can be proud of one another more at the end of the day. I think it's just a healthier environment. So I don't think it affects competition at all. If anything, you know, I've always found that knowing who I was racing against on a personal level makes me understand them as drivers better. And I think I can actually, you know, make judgments in certain situations better because I know their personalities. I know what they're like away from the track. And sometimes it can be an advantage to know your competitor that way. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, am I right?
Yeah, hey, think about this, Bart. So we're rifling down the end of the long straight at Toronto into turn 3, that hard right-hand turn. and Rossi is trailing his podcast co-host, Hinch. Hinch has some decisions to make. Okay, it looks like he's going to duck out to the right and try and pass me on the inside, take that lane. Do I let him do that and not try and prohibit that? Or as he starts to move, do I jink right, maybe knock him into the wall a little bit? Hopefully I take no damage and finish higher up in the race. But most importantly, boy, are we going to have an awesome episode of Off Track talking about that sucker. I'm just saying, Bart, there's a positive side to this too. You can create awesome podcasts based on what you do to who and when, and, Hinch is a content creator, not just a race car driver. That's what we're coming back to here. All right, let's close on this one from our pal Tim Same, who loves to send this in some way, shape, or form to a variety of guests. Hinch, if you became a WWE wrestler, what would your persona be, and what would your theme music be?
What would my theme music be?
Yeah.
Oh, man. If I had to be a wrestler, I would want to be... I'm not really built like a wrestler, Marshall, so I'd have to make myself more intimidating in other ways. So I'd grow my beard out real big. I'd call myself the Lumberjack. I'd wield an axe.
Yes!
And my theme music would clearly be Monty Python's I'm a Lumberjack and I'm Okay.
Boys and girls, we have the Week in IndyCar perfection in a final question and final answer with our guest, the mayor, who will be addressing you on Christmas Day.
The mayoral address.
Yes, all courtesy of our friend Adrian at IndyCar UK. My brother, you know how much I appreciate you and how much I appreciate you taking time here while you're doing busy stuff at home and holidays are coming up, etc., etc. So I'm overstating the obvious, but you've always been incredibly generous with whatever I'm doing, whether it's a story, a video, or this silly little podcast. Thanks for taking the time, man, because I know it would be very easy to say, nope, I am tuning you out, sucker.
No, man, appreciate you having me on. Thanks to all the listeners. Very happy holidays, happy new year, and can't wait to get back to St. Pete and get back to work for everybody.
Elton Julian, you're going to be an IndyCar entrant in 2019. Chevrolet Power, Ben Hanley is your driver. You might have to thrash to get this brand new Dallara chassis built to go testing in February, but tell us about this thing, man. I know folks might know the DragonSpeed name. They probably don't know Elton Julian, young open-wheel racer planning to take on the world from America. So, I don't know, do we start with your backstory a little bit to fill that in?
Thanks. First of all, thanks so much for the welcome. I think one of the coolest things, and one thing that I really like about what you just said, is that at the beginning, when I started the team 10 years ago, and we were running around trying to get people to pay to drive our little club cars and move it up through the GT ranks, and people would join up because of my background and my name, and to hear you say that we've managed to flip things around and people know the team more than they know me, I think that's fantastic, and that's what I always wanted, which was for the team to stand on its own too, and then build its own reputation, and it's quickly becoming much bigger than I ever was. And
well, you're a loathsome human being, so who would want to know about you? I mean, let's just be honest about that. But all kidding aside, I mean, this is a pretty big step, man. I mean, it's not as if competing in, the 24 Hours of Le Mans and all the things you've done with the team in LMP1, LMP2, etc. And those are some big, big things. Getting to IndyCar, at least for a kid from LA, that's got to mean something. Do you also love the fact that another kid from LA, Zach Brown, who you've known forever, is going to be competing at Indianapolis this year too?
I mean, it's an absolute pleasure for us to, and it's an honor for me to be able to say that we're going to enter a car in IndyCar. I remember the days when I was running around trying to get rides and knocking on everybody's doors and meeting Gene Haas and with Carl Sari and Ray Hall and everybody that was around back then, and getting told no everywhere I went and all that good stuff. Now I get to come with my own team. I don't have to ask anybody. It's great. The IndyCar is massive. I mean, look, it's a top flight championship. If I look at what we've built and where we're going, and you think about how far could we go, I think we're pretty much reaching the peak of what's attainable for a team that's built like mine, and it's just the beginning. We've only just said we're going to do it. Let's say confirmed that we're going to do it. It's easy to say we're going to do it, but we will be there, and monumental challenge. I mean, it's a top category, biggest teams in the world, top drivers, difficult circuits, so many variation of circuits, getting to know track evolution, getting to know what the car wants, and fighting in the prep of the cars and the work that goes, and the little black magic that goes behind the scenes, that people have so much experience. We have a lot of catching up to do, and next year needs to be the year that we really, really learn as much as possible. That's the biggest thing.
So you and I have been talking about this IndyCar aspiration for a good while, I guess definitely more behind the scenes, but one of the options, and something that maybe some IndyCar fans might be curious about, is you're coming in as DragonSpeed, period, not DragonSpeed hyphen Carlin, Juncos, name another Chevy team, not as an affiliate or partner as we've seen some teams do on their entry to IndyCar, maybe even just on a technical alliance standpoint. Why? That might be maybe one of the bigger questions folks have. Why are you coming in just as yourselves, instead of trying to link up with an experienced team or a veteran team that might be able to help in some way?
Well, is it because I like to do things the hard way? No, I mean, look, the purpose of this whole exercise is to establish the team in IndyCar long term. I've been living in France for the past 3 years with my family, competing and winning championships here, and I'd be lying to you if there wasn't people in the family that weren't ready to come home. There's that. There's, like I mentioned, the series being at the apex of what we think we can achieve and where we want to be long term. To do that, we're going to have to rip off the Band-Aid and just take it for a little while. And I think that while technical alliances and collaborations do, skip a few steps and make things a little easier and maybe look a little better at the beginning, depending who you can partner up with, obviously, we want to compete and eventually aim to beat all these guys. So I didn't see how we could really make it happen. We did, through the struggle to lock down an engine, we went through the process of talking to a few other teams, but at the end of the day, we ended up looking at each other and going, well, why? We just want to race against each other. So, no, we want to race full-time in IndyCar, and we want to establish a team, and we will create our own notebook and our own setups and move from there.
You mentioned the pursuit of engines. That's something that I believe fans probably have read about in recent months. What led you down the path of Chevrolet, and what are your thoughts going forward with them just as a technical partner? Because they aren't a, quote, team in terms of one of your competitors, but we know that as a manufacturer, they tend to come very heavy and very hard on the technical side to try and help their teams be as competitive as possible. So how'd you end up there, and what do you think that relationship might expand into?
Well, I think the first part is, it's no secret you have choice A or B. So it's, at the beginning, it's who you know, and then where you can get an intro. I have to say that, there were rumors about, and I'd mentioned that we wanted to go to IndyCar, but nothing was ever going to happen until we had an engine partner. And personally, as an American team racing in an American series, I don't think there's anything cooler than having an American engine. I think that's just seems right, and people will know more when our livery comes out and they see our traditional colors on the car, and then it all kind of makes sense. And I think commercially speaking, that's really good for us as well. The Chevy engine has proven to be a winner, as has the other brand, of course. But I felt very, very good about the involvement of the manufacturer, the level and the seriousness, and how far up the ladder it goes in that building. And I feel like we're part of something greater. I feel that it's the right way to go.
Let's talk a little bit about the other decisions. So instead of buying a used Dallara, you've opted to give Dallara a ring and say, hey, I want something new. Tell us about that decision, when you think that car might arrive and allow you to get on track for testing. And also share a little bit about, you do have two shops, one in France, one in Florida. Where you think this is going to be based out of primarily, and how are you going to staff this?
Getting a new car is really, if the option is there, is a no-brainer. The cars take a lot of abuse, and in IndyCar, you do have a lot of contact, mainly against concrete. So there's always the, where has this thing been and what's the history of it, which really, if you're going to invest this much money and this much effort and this much manpower, the cost of a tub or a chassis or a rolling chassis, if that's the hold-up, then I don't think you should be there. So I think that, I always wanted to or hoped for the possibility to get a new car. And, we've been able to do that. So we'll start fresh. It'll be only us that have rubbed on it. And I think that will allow us also to learn a little bit about what you get from Dallara and where you got to go with it. I think that this first year, as far as a base is concerned, with the European Le Mans commitments that we have, with the WEC commitments that we have, with potential 1920 WEC commitments that are coming, which will be no more than one car, I would say, and the 5 races in the States, plus Daytona that we're doing, the 24 with 2 cars, we're pretty much going to continue to operate as a flyaway team, which is what we've been doing for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're comfortable with and something that we've become quite good at. And, we know how to do the logistics and the scheduling of the workload and the parts ordering and the crack checking and all the things that we need to do along the way. I think long term, what I'd really like to do is I'm taking a really good look at Charlotte area to base ourselves full time for the IndyCar program. I like the idea of that, and so that's kind of what we're aiming at.
Just the last couple of things that come to mind, Elton, and these are things, I apologize, I'm asking you things we've discussed many times, but I do realize that a lot of IndyCar fans might not know you or might not have heard your voice, so good opportunity to get involved here. Looking at your choice of driver, Ben Hanley, that's going to be someone who he's a best-kept secret in sports car racing. He does have a very solid open-wheel background as well. Tell us about the choice of Ben, who's been with you for a while, but you also have some other pretty amazing drivers, too, that you could have chosen. Anthony Davison, there's a lot of folks that, I guess, if we wanted to look at the DragonSpeed prototype roster, why Ben compared to some of the other names that might stand out even higher?
You asked one of the questions you asked earlier, I didn't get to answer, which was basically stat. I mean, and it kind of ties into the Ben question. We're a team. We're a team that has become a family, and we're about 32 to 35 deep when it comes to the race weekends in the WEC. We're bringing the best of the best that we have, that we've selected to run the IndyCar from the people that we have, plus a few sprinkled U.S. guys that are not with me now, that were with me in the past, that have series experience specifically. But this sense of unit, this sense of family and understanding, apart from the talent I believe Ben has and his ability, and most of the people that know, many of which are already in IndyCar, would say right away, of course he should be there. He should have always been there. But apart from that, is with all the variables that we're bringing to the table, as far as establishing a new team, a new car, a new formula, and everything we've just talked about, he is the one I know best. He is the one that has the closest relationship with our engineer and our lead mechanic and our crew chiefs. He is a part of the team. So it's a no-brainer.
I can't wait to see it, my man. And knowing the livery that you have used for a while now, I cannot wait to see that on an IndyCar, because how's this? You better also plan some form of mobile merchandise sales, because I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of American IndyCar fans who love seeing a car in definite American livery that you've used for many years now in sports car racing. So, yeah, nothing but good stuff,
man. Yeah,
man.
It's going to be cool. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it, Marshall, because it's not something we're springing on just because we're coming home. It's something we've been flying all around the world with. It's part of our story. And there's going to be, I think, something really unique that happens this year that's also worth mentioning before we sign off, is that livery and that driver and that team are going to be at Daytona 24. We're going to race at Sebring. We're going to race at the Indy 500, and we're going to race at Le Mans. And I don't remember the last time that's been done.